Okay, so I'm going to be making two more presentations today. So first I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes about blockchain security challenges, and then immediately after this I also have a presentation where I'm going to talk about proof of stake. So start off with blockchain security challenges. So personally, like to me, one of the most interesting paradoxes of blockchain technology is that, on the one hand, it's one of the primary purposes of blockchain technology that it is supposed to be more secure than other ways of doing things, and that we're using blockchains because we want, more security than we can get from centralized systems, less ability for them to get hacked, and so forth. So on the one hand, we want to use blockchains because they're more secure, but on the other hand, blockchains are new and emerging technology. And new and emerging technologies are necessarily risky and necessarily the kinds of environments that where things are kind of evolving fast and where people, naturally wants to move fast and break things because that's the way to get, get new technologies improved more quickly. And we are just there haven't really been established kind of best practices, established customs, established infrastructure around the technology that makes security naturally possible. And so blockchains are in this interesting position where they are, at the same time, in many ways, much safer than any existing system that does the same task. But on the other hand, where they have security pitfalls of their own that, because of other properties of blockchain technology, often end up being more serious. So there's two major subdivisions of this, and I'll talk about both. So the first one that I'll talk about is user account security. So here's a brief tour through Bitcoin land, 2011 and 2013. In June 2011, the Bitcoin Talk member Alan Vane lost 25,000 Bitcoins, worth $500,000 at the time, today worth $100 million, after an unknown intruder somehow gains direct access to his computer. The attacker was able to access Alan Vane's wallet.dat file and quickly empty out the wallet, either by sending a transaction from Alan Vane's computer itself, or by simply uploading the wallet.dat file and emptying it on his own machine. So imagine you wake up and you're $100 million poorer. Bitcoin developer Stephane Thomas had 3 backups of his wallet: an encrypted USB stick, a Dropbox account, and a VirtualBox virtual machine. However, he managed to erase 2 of them and forget the password to the 3rd, forever losing access to 7,000 Bitcoins, worth $28 million now. Thomas's reaction: I'm pretty dedicated to creating better clients since then. And more. So those 2 both came from an article on that you can find the URL here, Bitcoin Self-Defense Wallet Protection, that I wrote 3 years ago, probably 5 years ago, and it lists a few other interesting cases. So it even lists weird cases where you have a wallet that was double encrypted with 2 passwords, but the second password was weak because it was because it had to be typed quickly on a phone, and so some guy managed to basically break into a rooted phone, get the password with the outer layer decrypted, then brute force the inner layer. Then there's weird attacks that have to do with fake clients. There's people who accidentally delete non-deterministic wallets, and so they have backups, but they don't realize that the backups don't contain keys of coins that they have received since then. So a lot of really nasty situations, right? And so, you might think, well, geez, security in decentralized systems is hard. But security in centralized systems is hard too, right? And so I'm sure everyone is aware of this MtGox incident where what was the world's largest Bitcoin exchange at the time lost about $460 million, and which is now worth, let's see, $3.2 billion. And there's just some random guy out there, and he's got anywhere up to $3.2 billion. And why? Basically because the operator of this particular exchange just turned out to be a not very honest guy who kept on getting money drained from this wallet, and he just didn't report that anything happened until the very end. So we don't want to, basically the main challenge is, how do we avoid the flaws, the security challenges of decentralized systems where regular users are asked to basically manage full control of their own private keys without introducing the security flaws of centralization, where you have one single big centralized thing, and the big centralized thing is liable to get hacked, leading to loss of financial derivatives, funds, or information about what Ethereum you had. So this is kind of a bit of a paradox, right? And in general, there have been solutions, right? But so far, there haven't really been any full solutions, and I don't think there ever will be full solutions to this problem. I think the best that we can do is come up with partial solutions that increase the difficulty of either thefts or losses of these large magnitudes happening, but without hurting usability too much. So just one of the simplest techniques is something called a multisig wallet, and this is a fairly simple piece of technology. Basically, think of it as a smart contract on a blockchain, and the contract has a rule that says, here are my 3 keys, and this contract is willing to make any transfer from the account if any 2 out of those 3 keys approve the operation. So you might have 3 keys, and you could imagine various different configurations for this. So you could imagine 1 key being on my laptop, 1 key being on my phone, and 1 key just being on a piece of paper that I have in my house. In the normal case, I would make a transaction with my laptop, confirm it with my phone. In the cases where my laptop breaks, I would go back, take out my cold wallet, and upload the cold wallet into either my laptop or my phone, and then use that to confirm the transaction. If one of those 3 things gets hacked or stolen, then you can just move the funds to a new wallet, right? So with this kind of design, 2 failures needs to happen in order for you to actually end up losing any money or for someone to end up stealing any money. Do multisig wallets make sense to people? Okay, so there's some, multisig wallet is a fairly general category, and there's actually a lot of user experience design choices in terms of who actually controls these keys. So laptop, phone, and cold wallet is one choice. This is if you still want to do everything yourself. There's also 1 key on your laptop or your phone, 1 key on a cold wallet, and 1 key on a semi-trusted third party. And the semi-trusted third party could do things like it could automatically send you, let's say, an SMS confirmation code, ask you to type the confirmation code in, and if you actually type the code in, then it'll co-sign transactions. It could have different checks that depend on the value of the transaction. So for anything below $1,000, it just accepts it without question. For anything between $1,000 and $10,000, it asks for a phone confirmation. For anything above $10,000, it asks for a video call with your passport. I mean, once you start adding in these kind of semi-trusted third parties, you could kind of assign them various different kinds of roles, right? And so the idea here is that you could benefit a lot from the security of having this kind of intermediary help make the decision of should the coins come out from the wallet or not, but you notice that you're not giving them full power to just steal all your coins unilaterally, because it's a 2 out of 3 system, and so if the semi-trusted third party turns out to be evil, then they still have to either break into your laptop or steal your cold wallet. Or you could imagine basically just make a multisig wallet between a bunch of friends. So there's lots of ways to organize these kind of multisig wallets. So far, adoption realistically has been low, and I would say this is in part due to a lack of kind of basically good solutions that have good user experience that still give you this kind of security. And so if you are a crypto entrepreneur and you want to solve real problems that will help bring closer to mass adoption, then try to make something in this area that's more user-friendly is one of the things that you should consider. This, by the way, is an example of a multisig wallet that's written in Viper. So same programming language as I used before lunch. And you can see basically it has this approve function, and the approve function just asks for a sequence number. It asks for where you want to send the money, how much money you want to send. This is data if you want to call a contract. And then it asks for SIG data, and the SIG data basically asks for like 5 signatures. Each signature is contains 3 values, VRS, because that's how Ethereum signatures work. And basically it just checks that there are at least 3 valid signatures, and if there are, then it actually makes the call, right? So there's another interesting kind of design that's in MES Vault. So this is a design that came out of Cornell about a year ago, and there were, as I understand it, has also been independently invented in a couple other places as well. But the general principle is this: you have one key, and this key can initiate a withdrawal from the account. But in order for the withdrawal to finalize, you have to wait for 24 hours. So after 24 hours, the withdrawal can get finalized. But within that 24-hour time period, if you see a withdrawal that you want to cancel, you can cancel it. So what's the point of this, right? The security model basically says, if you lose your key, then you still lose your money. But if your key gets stolen, then you lose your money, but you can prevent the attacker from ever taking the money out. So if your key gets stolen, but you still have the key, then you can cancel their withdrawals, they can cancel your withdrawals, and so no one will ever get any money out of the system. And so the idea here is that it basically removes the incentive for people to try to steal because, well, they can prevent you from having money, but they can't get any profit from doing it themselves. So it turns theft into just a simple griefing attack. So this is another interesting kind of model for these for creating more secure wallets. And then there's also kind of weird modifications where you can take an MES vault and then you can add a second key that has certain powers. And then you can change the security model back into this kind of 2 of 3 one where if you lose your key, then you can get your money out. If your key gets stolen, but you still have it, then you can get your money out. And if you depend on but it depends on the secondary party. And if the secondary party betrays you, then you can still get your money out. Right? So you can design these kind of systems that basically where you need 2 things to fail at the same time in order for you to lose your money. If there's only one failure, then there's always some way for you to get your money out. So these are the kinds of designs that people are thinking about. But in my view, like the main challenge with getting these kind of mass adopted basically is making the user experience as friendly as possible. So entrepreneurs in the space, I mean, as I understand, Israel has good entrepreneurs, so challenge for you. Great, so that's one kind of security challenge, and now I want to get into another kind of security challenge that has to do with smart contracts, right? So, I mean, we've already kind of heard this discussion of, what are smart contracts? And the usual way that I describe them is they are programs that control money. So when Nick Szabo came up with the concept of smart contracts, he had this interesting analogy where he likens them to being like vending machines. So if you think of a vending machine, it kind of is a device that enforces it kind of is a program that controls assets, and it releases those assets based on rules that are enforced in physical hardware. So the rules of the program are very simple. You put 10 shekels in, you get a bottle of water. You do not put 10 shekels in, you do not get a bottle of water. Nice and simple, right? So the purpose of the vending machine is it's this box that uses the box's own physical security in order to enforce this kind of atomic swap invariance that either shekels go in and water goes out, or shekels do not go in and water does not go out. So you can think of smart contracts as being kind of like vending machines, except they're vending machines that exist inside of these kind of cryptographic digital virtual worlds. The benefit of virtual worlds is that unlike vending machines, where you can just knock them over and like break them with a hammer and get all the water you want for free, in the digital world, the walls are infinitely strong, right? Any single this is what like Zuko always likes saying about cryptography. It's this one area where defense is so much stronger than offense that even regular people stand a chance of protecting themselves in certain ways against government actors. So digital world defense is very strong, and so smart contracts could potentially be much more powerful and much more usable. Simple example, escrow. So the program logic would just say, if something happens, send money to party A. If something does not happen, send money to party B. And here's some code. So here's just a simple 2 out of 3 escrow system. So the kind of story here is, you can imagine, let's say I am selling you, or you are selling me a phone, and let's say you're selling me a phone for 1 Ether. Then step 1 would be, I would call the init function, and it would specify you as the seller, and it would specify some mutually trusted third party as the arbitrator. then it would send these, this probably should be payable, but it would just set these 3 variables. Then you have 2 functions, and you have a function called refund. And the refund basically is, if you as the seller decide you do not have the ability to give me the phone, then you can choose to give me my money back. Or if I decide that I have received the phone, then I can call finalize and I can give you the money. If neither of us are if I'm not willing to finalize and you're not willing to refund, then the arbitrator has the ability to call either of the 2 functions, and so the arbitrator can decide basically to send the money to the buyer or to the seller. Now note that this is still a substantial trust reduction because the arbitrator does not have the ability to take money for themselves. So this is just like one example of a thing you can do with smart contracts. And there's plenty of other cool mechanisms that you can do with them. So for example, you can pay for a solution to a math puzzle, right? So basically, you can have a smart contract that says if someone provides a number and this number satisfies some mathematical property, then you pay them money. 2 of 2 is scorched earth escrows. This is something that, I mean, I know at the very least Oleg Andreev came up with this, but the basic idea is it's the same kind of consumer to merchant scenario where I'm selling you a phone, except we do not have a trusted third party. And if we disagree, then basically the money goes nowhere, the money gets burned, and some of the buyer's money and some of the seller's money both gets burned. So if the 2 parties cannot agree, then both parties just end up losing heavily. And the idea is that this is supposed to kind of game theoretically drive people toward cooperation. Channels, so this is like things like the Lightning Network, things like Plasma, things like payment channels. There's a fairly complex topic in its own right. You can do them with smart contracts. Lotteries and other randomized games. If a random number goes one way, pay some money to one guy. If a random number goes another way, pay some money to another guy. Chess for money on the blockchain, other deterministic games. You can totally like play any deterministic game on the blockchain, and you can have a smart contract that enforces the rules of the game. Whoever wins wins a bet and gets some money, and whoever loses gets nothing. Interactive verification of computation. So this is if I want to make some heavy computation, and this computation is too heavy to verify on the blockchain entirely, then you can come up with these fancy interactive protocols that basically break up the verification into parts, and they kind of pit different groups of people against each other in order to try to sort of collectively arrive at a conclusion of like whether or not some solution is correct or not. Also a fairly complex and interesting area in itself. And another really interesting area is to pay for file storage. So if I want to pay you to store a file, then I would send you the file. Then there are cryptographic ways where you can prove that you're storing the file without uploading the entire file to the blockchain. And so we can have a smart contract that just keeps paying you every day in exchange for you providing a proof. And then when I want to download the file back from you, then there's another kind of contract where I can pay for the download, and this can also be made trust-free. So there's a lot of different kind of fancy and interesting kind of mechanisms that you can do with smart contracts, but not enough time to go into them here. What could possibly go wrong? Who here has not heard about the Dow? Who here has not heard about the fact that the Dow got hacked and almost lost $60 million? Okay, so basically this was a big contract that had a lot of money, and it had this thing in it called a reentrancy attack. And a reentrancy attack is basically an exploit of a specific feature of the Ethereum virtual machine. And the idea here basically is that it has to do with the fact that contracts can kind of call other contracts, and that this kind of calling is also kind of the same operation as the operation of sending Ether. So what you have here is the contract has a withdraw balance function. Now, in a withdraw balance function, what you want to do is you want to send someone money, and you want to set their balance to 0 so that they can't withdraw their money, right? That seems like a no-brainer. If you want to withdraw money, you give them the money, and you set a flag so that they can't get their money a second time. Now, here's the problem. If you send the person the money first, and you make it a call, and you pass in a huge amount of gas into the call, then what could happen is that this address that's getting the money could be a contract, and the contract itself could call withdraw. And so basically, you could have a situation where this calls the contract, then the contract calls withdraw, then the execution goes here, then it goes back up here, then it goes here, then it goes back up here. And you might note, then the execution goes here, then it goes back up here, then it goes here, then it goes back up here. And you might notice that the person can withdraw money over and over and over again without before, and this line that sets the balance to 0 does not get called until the very end. So you can withdraw money a really huge number of times before, before your balance gets set to 0. And so this is basically a way of stealing money, and this is what happened to the DAO. Okay, now other cool bugs. So there's lots of cool applications of smart contracts. So there's also lots of cool ways that smart contracts can go horribly wrong. So variable names, private variables that end up not being private, gas limit issues, publicly accessible become the owner functions, call stack limit bugs. I'll go into all of these in more detail. I have an example for all of them, but the last one actually is not an issue anymore. So what happened before is that there was this call stack limit where if contracts call other contracts, then the call tree was limited to a maximum of 1,024 calls. And so you could have a situation where a contract expects to have the ability to call another contract, but then because the call is already at the bottom of the call tree, it doesn't have any more call depth. In Tangerine Whistle, we basically did something where we replaced that limit with a feature that says that a call can only call a child call, or can only call a contract with 63/64 of the gas that the contract itself has. And so we basically created a different way of enforcing a de facto limit without actually having a limit. And this basically completely removed this issue as a category of issue that people have to worry about. So let's look at some examples. So this was a casino that existed on the Ethereum blockchain. Now, if you have a casino, then the casino needs a random number generator. And so, okay, let's have a random number generator. Generate rand. We're going to take a bunch of numbers. We're just going to add them together. Okay, have a bunch of random junk, mod 37, and return. Easy, right? This is how random number generators should work. Here's the problem. Even though this function is called private, it's on a public blockchain. Every single line of code of this is completely public. And so what actually happened is that you had people who were basically trying to play the system. So they would make a transaction, then they would locally simulate the transaction running on the blockchain. And if their local simulation suggested that the transaction would win, then they would publish it. And if it doesn't, then they would not publish it and they would wait for the next block. Now, in reality, this is not 100% accurate because it depends on things like the block difficulty and the block timestamp. But generally, you can, especially with the block time, with the block timestamp, you can often kind of predict it to within a few seconds, or at least you can predict a lot of biases. And so you can easily imagine a game that's normally a coin flip and you being able to push your advantage up to something like 60, 70, or 80%, right? So this actually happened. So remember, kids, data on a public blockchain is public. Now, there are actually ways to do randomness on a blockchain securely, but all of them have to do with making the mechanism asynchronous. So you cannot have synchronous casinos on a blockchain. What do I mean by asynchronous? Step 1, you sign a transaction, you send the transaction making the bet. Step 2, the contract waits until it gets a random number in the future. So the random number is not known during step 1. It only becomes known in the future. Then that's step 2. And then step 3, after the random number becomes known, either you get money back or you don't. OK. This is from an application that's called Fire Ponzi. And as you can probably tell from the name, it's a fairly simple Ponzi, right? So what's supposed to happen is there's a list of people, and each of those people, and you can send money, and if you send money, then you join this list of participants, and the money that the new participant sends just gets paid out to previous participants, right? Is anyone here confused about what a Ponzi is? Okay, so You might notice, though, that unlike regular Ponzi's, this Ponzi is fraudulent. So over here, you might notice that there's actually this is the payout cursor ID, right? So what's supposed to happen is that there's a counter where it pays person 1, then in increments, then it pays person 2, then in increments, then it pays person 3, then in increments, and so forth. Over here, though, you might notice that this thing, there's actually 2 variables: payout cursor underscore ID underscore, and payout cursor underscore ID no underscore. Payout cursor underscore ID underscore increments, and it does the while loop, and it keeps on incrementing it. Payout cursor underscore ID no underscore starts at 0 and just is 0 forever. And so, in reality, what this Ponzi scheme actually does is people put in money, and it keeps on sending all of their money to the guy who started the scheme in the first place. So basically what turns out is that this Ponzi scheme is really just sending all of the money to the guy who started the Ponzi scheme in the first place. So this is Rubik's. So this is Rubik's. This is another Ponzi, and what happened basically. The problem here is that in Solidity, the way that Solidity knows that some function is a constructor function, so a constructor function is a function that only gets called once where the contract is created, is if the function has the same name as the contract. The problem with this guy is that he changed the name of his contract, so he probably changed it from dynamic pyramid to Rubik's, without changing the name of the constructor. And so what this does is it accidentally turns the constructor into a regular function. And so now you have a regular function that anyone can call, and the function that anyone can call sets the creator to the message sender. Now the creator is kind of like an owner. Basically it has admin rights to take all the money out. So anyone has the ability to call this function, become the owner, and take all the money for themselves at any time. So by the way, the recent parody Multisig Wallet, it was also kind of a similar bug. It was actually a more subtle bug because you had to actually go through 2 steps where the first step was a delegate call, but it is kind of the same kind of issue where it was just too easy for anyone to become the owner. So this really is a kind of common category of issue that people should be worried about. Unbounded length loops. So this is from a project called Governmental, and Governmental is also a Ponzi. Get it? The government is a Ponzi. Ha ha ha. So, unfortunately, this contract has much social insecurity in it. That was a bad pun. So what you have here is you have a loop, right? And what the loop does is it just goes through and it keeps on, and it just basically pays a bunch of people, and or in this case, it specifies that some set of people have already been paid, right? But the problem is, it's a loop, and the loop has a variable length. And the variable length, as the number of users goes up, the variable length of the loop also keeps going up. Eventually, there were so many players in this game that the size of this number got so high that there was not enough space within a block gas limit to actually call this function. And so the contract just got stuck, right? It's theoretically possible to make progress, but in order to make progress, it required 5.1 million gas, and the block gas limit was only 4.7 million. And so the whole thing was stuck for about a year until, and this is very ironically, during the Dow hack, the attacker spams the blockchain with so many transactions that it temporarily managed to nudge the block gas limit up to 6 million, and so the contract managed to get unstuck. One attack solved another attack. Now, there's also interesting kind of bugs that we haven't seen that much of yet, right? So this is other categories of stuff that you probably want to be concerned about. Integer overflow. So, are there issues where if you add up a bunch of numbers, because in Ethereum numbers are all 32-byte, what if someone somehow comes up with some way to make numbers overflow and either make a bunch of money disappear or make some program just do something completely crazy? Accumulated rounding errors. Just deliberate obfuscation, tricky type conversions. Also, gas limit issues don't just have to come about because of loops. Gas limit issues could also happen because Solidity has data types that have variable sizes, so strings and bytes. And if you have data types with variable sizes, then the variable size could also get so big that you can't do anything within the gas limit. So this is another thing that people should be worried about. Game theoretic bugs. So this is one of the kind of more interesting types of bugs, and it's probably one of the more subtle types. So this is a fairly simple kind of prototype contract, right? Basically, this is if you want to pay someone for solving a math puzzle, then you have a contract that says anyone can submit a solution. If the solution is correct, then the sender of the transaction gets all of the balance in the contract, right? Very simple bounty, makes sense. Now, what happens here in reality? Let us suppose that one particular person sends a solution. Then another person, just anywhere on the network, sees the transaction, they see the solution, and they snipe the solution. So they just send another transaction with a higher gas price. That transaction will likely get in first, and so the second person will likely be able to collect the reward instead. The kind of end game of this actually just is that the miners would steal the solutions themselves. So this doesn't work. One way to mitigate this problem is that basically you have a commit reveal scheme, right? So the first step is that if you have a solution hash, then you would make a commit, and you would commit to the hash, and it would save the hash, and it would also save the block number from which you can start doing the reveal. Then you have a function for accepting a solution, and then that solution has to come from the same address, and then it checks that the block number is new enough, and it checks that the hash actually is the hash that was saved before, and if both of these claims are true, then it sends the person the money. So this way, at least the very simple kind of sniping attack doesn't work anymore. Other kinds of game theoretic bugs. Interactive protocols require incentives to audit. So if you have protocols that are of the form, oh, we put some data on the blockchain, then we give people time to audit it, and if someone finds an error, then they should tell the contract about the error. Then you have this problem that, well, what is the incentive to audit? And if the submitters are honest 100% of the time, then the incentive to audit is zero. So in a lot of these cases, you have the situation where the Nash equilibrium actually isn't for 100% honesty. It's a Nash equilibrium where the attacker actually does have a non-zero chance of winning. Incentive to withhold blocks. So if block hashes get used for randomness, then a miner that creates some block might have the incentive to not publish it if the miner is playing the game and they want to cheat. Incentive to create short-range forks. If progress in a game depends on some player, then the player needs to always have an incentive to participate. So one simple example is, this is an example courtesy of Andrew Miller, is that if you're playing rock, paper, scissors on the blockchain, then in order to prevent cheating, you want to have this kind of hash commit reveal scheme, right? So step one is everyone submits the hash of their move. Then step two is everyone uncovers the move. But then let's say I play rock, I send hash of rock, then the other guy sends hash of paper, then phase two, the other guy sends paper. I know that I lost. So now I have no incentive to uncover my move. And so if you run this, if you have a contract that's implemented naively, it could just get stuck forever. And so you need to have some kind of incentive to encourage me to actually provide the value. And in those cases where I don't, there has to be some pathway where people can get their money out. Here's another kind of scary one. Sealed bid auctions. So a lot of people are getting interested in doing sealed bid auctions on Ethereum and generally auction mechanisms. ENS uses sealed bid auctions. The problem is that auctions in Ethereum are not, even if they look sealed, they're not sealed. The reason is that you have to actually send Ether to the contract. When you send Ether to the contract knows how much Ether you sent. And in general, this is part of a larger point, which is that in mechanism design, you might have heard of something called the revelation principle. And the revelation principle basically says something like any mechanism has an equivalent mechanism where you just basically tell the guy running the mechanism what your strategy is, and the guy implements the strategy for you. So that kind of logic only tends to work well if the mechanism has privacy. Blockchains do not have privacy by default. So this is a kind of challenge that needs to get worked around. There are weird ways to work around it, but it's possible. So thank you. Possible.